Hello, everyone. This is Jason Rodriguez with Zpryme. Today I have the pleasure of being joined by Navneet Trivedi of Vrinda. Navneet, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, thankful. I hope you guys are good actually in Texas with all what you've gone through in last week.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, last week was certainly one for the record books on a lot of fronts. And I really appreciate you taking some time to come and talk with me and share your thoughts about some of the situation and some of the impacts it could have and hopefully some of the innovation it can spur a lot as you've recently been writing about this situation, have some really interesting thoughts that really haven't been talked about much. So I'll jump right in it. Just on the quick, what happened in Texas, and who do you think is to blame, if anyone?
Yeah, so again, Texas is very close to my heart because when I moved to US in 2006, my first job, like really the real job of working with the utility was in Texas. So I came to Texas. I have been to all the power plants of TXU and I worked with CPS as well as BP. So a lot of friends there. So that's why my heart goes out to what kind of was going on. Um, Now, when I look at like whom to blame, I don't think that in this moment, it is a situation like if you went to Florida and you didn't bring your snow pants, right? Means whom you want to blame, right? So I understand that there may be long-term challenges like a planning and all like, but in this moment, like nobody could have thought that, this level of, outage will happen, like the snowfall kind of happen in Texas is unheard of actually. So I don't think that we need to waste time like in blaming people, but I know that's how the political system works. And that's like one of the things which worries me a lot, like for my friends in utility, which I kind of very critical of them, but I love them actually. But the reason is, as we are going to see these severe weathers, their jobs are online, but necessarily they cannot control these situations. Like, ERCOT is a system operator and they're like, they asked to resign and all, but they could have done like very little in this situation where like, we went way beyond in our kind of parameters of grid operation. So I don't think the blame has to be put. What we need to talk about is, what's the kind of, what we should do and what, we could have done maybe in the past and what we should do in the future.
So could have maybe asked a different way. So could have this have been avoided maybe in maybe in the planning, the operations. There's a lot of talk about weatherization. So should those things be taken into account?
Yeah, absolutely. Like when you are asking me, after what happened, definitely the planning had huge error, right? If you look at the, planning for the load forecasting, weather forecasting, you know, even, reserve margin kind of forecasting, they all were kind of way off, right? So I'm sure, but that goes back to I can bet with you that any other state, if you have this situation, they would have the problem. The fundamental problem planning is based on the data, you know. And I have worked for close to now 30 years with utilities. I'm yet to meet a utility which can give me correct data about their system and their kind of actual real time data. So data gaps are there, and that makes inherent error. That's why we go by like judgment and think. And then what you can see, you might have heard a lot of technology companies coming in, people talking about automation. But one of the deficiencies in the operation we could see that when rolling blackouts happened, I don't think they had a very good way of even have a visibility into the network to know at a granular level where the load is, like where who is like, level of customer. So they had to cut very quickly. And I think that kind of went into a very different way of operation, which is very crude. It reminds me of India, where I come from, where we used to just switch off the power from 220 kV substation for people. And you can imagine if you switch off at high voltage, you don't know even a hospital is there in that area because there's definitely a hospital, right? If I'm cutting out a city. And something similar, like kind of not that horrendous, but like something similar happened in Texas. So obviously they could have done better kind of investment in planning. They could have done like in automation of the distribution system and things like that. But these are like, the long term. So I'm sure people will learn the lesson and do, right in the future.
So how do we get to something a long-term solution? And are we thinking about how we solve this the right way? And what does that transition and long-term path look like in your view?
Yeah, I think so. That's where I am kind of differing with what I'm hearing, and that a lot of people who have a lot of experience here, people are talking about we should have weatherized the generating stations, and we should have figured out like reserve for the gas, and we did this that. I think that okay, yeah, that's great. You should do it. Like with Texas, may not you see that next snow for 10 years, right? But the fundamental which nobody wants to talk, and I think I know the reason, but I don't want to kind of sound like skeptical about the thing. The fundamental in my view is that there is a limitation to the utility grid, the way it is designed and way it is today. And that limitation is that it really works well in the blue sky, but when it comes to extreme weather, this grid is not designed for that. And you can do whatever to gold plate, I call it, like you can put, but that's not going to solve the problem, right? Like in California we had the same, like wildfire happened in the grid and they had to cut the power, right? So the fundamental thing is that ability of the grid to meet the load of the customer in extreme weather is very limited by design. And what we need to, if we really want to solve this problem and honestly, then we should in the industry need to accept that there is a limitation in the grid. And then the solution is, if I tell you like okay, grid cannot like really solve these extreme problems, then we will ask question, then how we serve the customer, right? And when you talk about serving the customer, then you need to talk about customer level resiliency, like what you need to do to ensure, like if everybody in Texas had like a battery or 4 hours of supply, if they had like majority electric cars and that could have acted as a battery for home, I think people would have, the operation of the grid would have been very different. First of all, like you would have not got this rolling blackouts, right? And you would have kind of ride this thing much better than what you did now. But looking at in the future, and I am confident, like it's not good to predict these kind of things, but like this kind of event will happen very often. And it's not only Texas, everywhere. So what, and suppose you want to spend like $1, where you are going to put that dollar? Like I would put it to make it customer resiliency before I kind of invest into making the distribution system or a grid resiliency, what people talk about, like, and I call it like gold plating. So that's I think what we need to talk about if we really serious about avoid next Texas issue.
Fascinating, definitely fascinating, and I love the way you're looking at this and forcing us to really think critically of how we get there, and challenging just a lot of the traditional kind of reactive ideas that have been coming out there. So kind of to close, what lessons can we learn from other states out there and maybe internationally here to apply as we move forward here in Texas?
I so that's like before I kind of comment on that, I think in US we are not really still understanding the challenge what is coming in front of like us, right? I think that European utilities in Australia and all, like they really kind of started putting distributed energy resources and like integrating that into the operations, and they are serious about it. Like whereas in US we all started, and I will say this, and I wrote about this. It feels bad for me to say this because I am from New York and I support like what New York need to be. But when we started Rev 5 years ago, and I was the one who wrote an article saying that this will not work, and like a lot of people say, "Oh, you were right," and I just don't want to be right about that. Rev was about like having distributed resources and value, but in last 5 years now in New York, we have shifted very conveniently to having large scale wind, big transmission lines, and what we are aiming that we will have 100% clean electricity. But the problem is not about 100% clean electricity. Problem is going to be, are you be able to serve your customer? And what are we doing for that? Right? So the lessons learned from this and like other places, even in Europe and all, like more focused is on the distributed side, like customer side. Let them have like solar batteries and let them, and then integrate that back into the grid, you know, which is lagging in US. Like what US has done, even in California, they put a lot of solar projects and all, but they are just like on their own. Utilities are just, you remember the net metering in California, they were just paying you to just have solar on your roof, whether it works or not. Why? Because then they can run the big plants and supply the power. But like till now, I would say that even in California, which is our kind of most advanced state, there is not a integration of the distributed resources the way you would like to see. So I think that is what, like, have this distributed resources meaningfully and then integrate them in your operation. And that's the way forward in my view.
Thank you, Navneet. Certainly, always exciting to talk and share ideas with you, and we're looking forward to kind of hearing more from you as these things play out here in Texas and then across other markets of the U.S. Appreciate your time today. You have a great day.
Yeah, thank you very much for giving an opportunity to speak. I'm very passionate, and you kind of made me this platform to share my views. I hope it helps everyone. Thank you very much.